What's up, people? My name's Anthony and welcome to September. Today I'm going to take you through some volume builder modeling techniques that you can use for more intricate or complicated, I guess, shaped pieces. If you're anything like me, you found the whole Cinema 4D system of modeling, or in general geometry, quite daunting at first. So I've got this little way that you can go about making shapes that come into your head fairly easily. You can always go about remeshing them later with some of the new techniques in Cinema 4D, but sort of a simpler, better way of getting your ideas down in 3D and creating shapes that you want to do. And I thought this was a pretty good example of that. So this is actually a ring that I've got in real life, which helps quite a lot. This is a ring I've literally got in front of me, and I can show you sort of how my brain would go around making this model in 3D. Sort of the sort of shapes I'd use and sort of like base layers, and we can go about rendering out really quickly, but this is more going to be like a focus on the modeling side of things. So we're in C4D here, and I'm going to take you through some of the sort of like methods I use to get this kind of shape. So my thought process, or generally the way you work with Volume Builder, is that you're working by having a variety of shapes and geometries, right? Most of them we'll probably get from here, but we can also model some ourselves. And some are going to be adding to the sort of like voxel shapes, which will be eventually baked, and some are subtracting, right? So the way you got to think about that is if you have a cube, and then, well, I'd rather show you, if you have a cube, it's a super crash course, then you have a second one, which is a little bit higher like this, and you chuck them both into a volume builder, remembering that cube 1 is the second one that you've duplicated. If you chuck this in, it's going to convert it to voxels. The more you move the voxel size down, the more detailed the geometry is going to be. Right, so if we were to move this down to 5 and you were to subtract, set this to subtract, you're essentially taking that, you're ghosting that out of the other one. So although that seems a little counterintuitive, when you start meshing this eventually, you can smooth this out and you can combine a lot more shapes to essentially genuinely create ideas that are in your head a lot more. I don't know why, but for me, this seems so much simpler when I really wanted to get stuff down quickly. Obviously, later on, you can sort of like, you know, fix the holes, and if geometry needs fixing or a different modeling technique is required, you can do that. But if I when I wanted to get ideas down quickly, this works super well. So we're going to head back to our reference real quick, and I'm going to show you how you can go about doing something more like this. So the way I'm thinking about this is that obviously it's a ring. So what you're going to want is firstly a sort of like quite a thin, almost coned excerpt. So the way I think about doing something like this is that you almost want a coned, slightly thinner excerpt of like two cylinders, sort of subtracting from each other, right? So if we go about doing that super quick, we can get something like, and the good thing is that you don't need to worry about the geometry or segments of the like plane geometry that you're using before it goes into the volume builder here. So we can get something like a cylinder. We can rotate this so we're working in the right axis, make this more like 90. We can scale this up a little bit just so it's making our lives a little bit easier. Duplicate this. In fact, we can shorten this first, maybe to something like this, I'd say. So we'll think about the thicker part of the ring here, right? So we'll go for something like this first. We're going to have to overlay a circle on the top, and then we can duplicate this, move this out super quick. We can take a look from the side view here, and we can go about scaling this down ever so slightly, right? So move it down like this, and then position it down a little bit. And that's what's going to let us get a sort of like thicker part towards the top and thinner band towards the bottom of the ring, right? So I'm taking a look at my ring here as I'm doing this, and you can sort of see I'm looking at the ring sideways, but this part is a little thicker than this thinner bit down here. So we should literally be able to potentially move this up a little bit, so you're dealing with a little more thickness in the geometry, and we can also see the sides getting thicker here. So generally this should give us kind of the effect that we want. We can go about stretching this out maybe a tiny bit more like this. I'd say something like that would work quite well. And then we need to make sure we're extending this all the way through so it fits through that initial cylinder, and we can chuck this into the volume builder just like this. We shouldn't have too much problems with like overlaying, stuff that's already come out of the volume builder, then putting in again. So we can may actually help us to increase. I know we said don't need to worry, but here we're starting to see some results. We make that 100. Those we definitely do not need. We can make sure we're setting this to subtract here, and we're getting our first incremental sort of ring shape. Although I do feel like we're going to want to have this cylinder a little smaller than what it is currently. So if we just really quickly take these out, have this scaled down ever so slightly, purely because I know we're going to have to shave off the top to create this sort of like flat look here, right? So we'll stick with something like this, drag both of those in, making sure we're saying this to subtract, and then we can grab our volume measure and literally drag this in like that, hit C on that, and we've got our geometry there. So you can see how easy it really is. Now what we want to do is sort of start working towards the cone shape, right? So if you imagine you're looking at here, this ring from sort of like this axis, it's not all one sort of like, it's slightly coned, if that makes sense. It's thinner down here than it is up here. So the way we can go about doing that is literally hopping back into this sort of view, and we can either draw some geometry ourselves with the like spline tool. Just here you can draw out the splines or using the pen tool or whatnot. But in this case, I think it may be better to just grab two cubes really simply like this, scale this up, maybe. I thought S might scale it for a sec there. It's actually T, so if you T this up, rotate this over to something like that, you can move this to about here. I'd say it'll be pretty good. We'll duplicate this, make sure we're working with exactly the same rotation, so literally just whack off the minus from that, and move this back so that what I'm looking at is making sure these edges are lined up. We can move that in a little bit, and we're getting a good thickness down here to up here, and that's something that I'd say is pretty accurate, so I don't really have a problem with it as such. So now what we can do is, you're seeing it's gonna take this original geometry and subtract these boxes from it, right? So we can knock these into volume builder and subtract both these cubes, and then drag it into a volume measure, and we can tweak this if need be. But we want to decrease our voxel size real quick, so we're working with as much detail as we can for now. See, as you start decreasing the detail, you start getting some weird shapes here and there. But this looks pretty good. Don't worry about how do not worry about how like sharp it looks for now, because there's a load of like smoothing techniques you can use. So that is something we can fix later on. I'll move that to 16, maybe 20 even. Minus 20. So I kind of want these to be a bit bigger, really. So we can scale that up a little bit. The rotations actually need to be down, because I'm thinking about how it's going to like look up here. So move this back to maybe minus 18, and then set this one super quick to something along the lines of 18. We should be able to move that in a tiny bit. Move this one in. Oh. Just making sure we're bearing the right bit in mind. This one needs to go in a little more. Keeping it quite thin at the bottom there, but I think that's almost the shape we're going for, so I think we should be fine with that. We can head to our volume mesh real quick, hit C on that to bake it, and that is another step towards getting our ring look. So now what we can do is think about the top. So we've got this -2 logo, which is the name of the brand, right? So we've got this sort of like M and the global logo, which we really want to subtract from the ring itself. So I think the best way of doing that, it would be creating the hole, and like shaving off a sort of like circular part at the top here, and then overlaying the ring on top of that, right? It seems to make a little more sense. You can see how the logo is sort of indented, right? So what we can do is hop into C4D super quick, and we can firstly go about, I think we can probably go about shaving off that top bit. So if we head here to cylinder, scale this up a little bit, just like that. We scale this down too, it doesn't really help us not matter too much. We can sort of like find a point which we think it would work at. So I'd say about here, most likely. Be careful. This is where the thickness that we sort of created earlier will sort of help us a little bit. And we can drag this into the volume builder one more time, setting our voxel size down and subtracting that bit there. And you see we're getting a square bit. We want this a little more circular. So what we've got to do is think about how we go about making that circular. So that ain't gonna have a. So we really want to think of a way of bringing that out ever so slightly. So maybe what we can do is duplicate this cylinder. And for now, taking these out, we can change the opacity of that. And we want something which is going to round this top bit off. So what we want to do is look at the top here. Most likely scale this down to something about that. Move it down a bit. And then create it quite thin and add this to the top, right? So whatever, you got to think that whatever this is going to get sort of like merged onto that shape. So we may want to make this a little bit. We want to think about how much the ring is coming out as well, right? So look at this reference. This part of the circle here sort of like almost merges out of the shape of the top of that. So it's like ever so slightly we'll want this to come out, but more like that maybe I'd say. And then we can increase the depth of this. We want to start thinking about currying this, because the problem is that the more we... So this is where some slight modelling might become necessary. So we've got our height segments here, and we may well be able to just hit C on that really quick, head into our face mode, or potentially our line mode. If we head to our line mode and get a loop select. How do we loop select? We can loop cut, but I seem to remember it's like UL, is it? Yeah, UL, and then grab that bottom bit there, and we should be able to scale that up. But we've got a little too many segments here, so if we just Control Z real quick, take a look at our lines. We can reduce these height segments a little bit, something which makes our lives slightly easier. Head back to your shading and hit C on that. Go back to our line mode, hit U and L on your keyboard, grab that, and keep hitting S and T stuff to scale. We can scale this out ever so slightly, maybe more in this direction, and then we can move that down if we wanted to. Or we need to get better with shortcuts, man. We can move this down somewhere like here, so it sort of like meets in really nicely. And we can go about, so this sort of bit, this bit is going to be maybe a slight issue here, but if all goes to plan, we can just, how easy is it to grab this and literally comb that in? Nah, it gets a little problematic, so we may have to select it all, and then are we able to scale it this way a little bit? Yeah, that seems to be too much of an issue, so we can always do that. You want to keep it in the ring a little more, and maybe we can start currying this ever so slightly. So there may be a taper, is that a thing? So if we put this, make this a child of the taper, fit to parent, what does our strength do here? So we want something like that. Maybe turn the curvature down ever so slightly, and we can grab a result similar to that, and maybe can we Alt G this so we can scale it in axis? It's going to scale everything. Hold on. Can we head back into geometry mode? Let's move to something like this. This is where you see the tweaking is important, but you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm trying to get this shape a little more. So this is too wide here almost. We want something like that. Yeah, we want something which is going to cone down as well, right? So maybe the taper, fit to parent, can go a little. Because where I'm looking at this ring is that we want the ring there to be a little smaller than that, but we want the roundness all over it, right? But you can kind of see where it almost like comes on here if you notice that. So it's almost like we may be taking the sort of like wrong approach here. If we just backtrack really quick and sort of take a look at what we're doing. We've got our original shape, and it does seem to be. So, see, I'm trying to think of what I'm holding the ring in real life for concentration, but I'm trying to think of what this shape would look like without that indent in the first place, right? So we've got our first sort of removal of the top bit here, right? We want to make this a little more smooth over. So maybe if we drag this real quick into a volume builder like this, make sure the voxels are down. We can drag into a volume mesher and start tweaking with this a little bit. So I kind of want to smooth this out to create some of the look. So if we grab an SDF smooth, that should allow us to really smooth out that shape that we created. So we've got this, and I'm still looking at this through, right, because this is definitely creating more of the sort of elliptical type, smoothed, worked out ring shape, but the idea of this is still a little troubling. So I mean, if we look at this side by side, you can see that the issue is if we shave off like just a portion of the top here, it's going to cut off, and we're going to still get this sort of like wide outline, which isn't really what we want. It's almost like we want to remove that altogether and just have a sort of ring up top. So you've got to sort of think. If we were to drag our cylinder in here and sort of take a look at what that would look like, just to remind ourselves and make sure we're setting that obviously to subtract here. Drag it under the SDF smooth, and it should smooth that too. So we get this is how we'd achieve our sort of like square look, and that is definitely a ring in itself, but obviously it's not our look. So if we hit an X on that, we almost want this up here to be more of a circular shape. It sort of brings us to the same issue as before. So we really want, even from this point, what shape is our cylinder? Cylinder's quite wide. What if we made this a little smaller? Sort of put it somewhere like pop that in super quick. Make sure we're saying that to subtract. I want to see how much of the roundedness we can actually achieve. So the more we bring this down now, the more it's going to shave off, right? But if we scale this up, this could be a delicate dance between so we may be almost better off making this a little smaller. Sort of like that, and then creating a ring up top, I suppose. So maybe if we hit C on that, in fact, duplicate that cylinder before we do that. Hit C on that, and then take our cylinder here, which we've made, increase the rotation segments a bit. We'll need something like this, I believe, but we want this to cone out ever so slightly, so shit, maybe we'll have to scale that down a bit. We can do that, but we want that to... Let's see what this looks like if we try this inside a volume builder, because we may well be able to sort of smooth this out to create what we want. So we'll this to 1. This is where we don't need to subtract anything. You see, if we would create subtraction there, we'll just cause issues. So we want this union. We could increase the voxel size to maybe 5, I don't know. Add a measure so it sort of like meshes it out so we can see what we're working with. See, it is starting to smooth out there, but nowhere near kind of what we want. So maybe we can scale this cylinder up. You can see we're sort of back to where we were before, because we want this. You want this ring to really cone down a bit more. So we've got kind of the basic look there, but we really want this up a bit more. Where maybe if we add a SDF smooth, or it seems to do sort of something, but a little too much. If we move our voxel size down, that should give us a little more control over the SDF smooth. And we're sort of starting to get a similar look there, but it blends it in, but not quite enough here, I'd say. Maybe if we were to scale this down, scale it up. That would, I should really put up the reference side to side because I'm looking at the real ring. We're getting a similar look here. What I'm really trying to do is, the perfectionist in me sort of wants this part here to be a lot smoother. And if you were to look here, that sort of part is blaring out ever so slightly, but that could well easily be fixed by grabbing a taper, putting that in, fitting that to parent, and then doing something along these lines. Obviously, maybe moving the curvature down a little bit, but it would fit that into the curve of the shape a little more. Right, this bit I'm not too worried about because that can come later. That's sort of a part of the. But this part just here seems to be fitting nicely. So maybe for now I'd say we can probably, let's scale this up ever so slightly. Take this taper, perfect this to a point that we're happy with. So something like this, although the circle's quite small though, we want something a bit more like that, I'd say. We can fix these side bits any sec. But we want to sort of like bear in mind how much we're smoothing here, because that bottom bit is getting a tiny bit tight. So maybe if we move this to maybe like 50, that's okay. So we can move that up real quick. Tweak this. I wanna move this part down a little bit. Maybe we can. Are we able to? We should really bake this taper before we do this, and we could well be able to just scale that in ever so slightly like that. Although it doesn't quite create the same effect of the. That takes it a little high, but we can always shave it off. So I think we may be okay to bake that, and then we can save this as ring at this point. Obviously, should really save a way earlier, and we can hop over, grab. This is where it would be ideal to sort of like save some of your shapes from last time, but it's okay. We can grab our cube, scale this up a little bit, or maybe in like this, and just try our best to get rid of them side bits so we can get one like that. And make sure we're tagging the same rotation, so setting this to about 16. You could also use this for actually like manufacturing rings and jewellery and stuff. If you're working with a manufacturer who really wants like, or you're struggling to get your idea across of the physical product itself, or your idea or your sketch, This would be quite a creative way to sort of put that across, the idea across to them. A lot of manufacturers require sort of like sketches and measurements and stuff like that, and obviously new generation, new software, new materials, new art forms, and that you have a bit more freedom. So I'm liking this, but this part is obviously ever so slightly problematic. We can move this entire thing in a bit, just like that, but we don't want to really take off too much from this bottom bit here, but it doesn't seem like that is an issue. We're getting a little bit of a ridge there, but the smoothing will save that. And we can grab our other cube and just drag that in until we see that's not an issue anymore, which happens to be about here. So just with a quick double check, we can look at both sides there. Looks fine to me. Drop that into a mesher super quick. And that's almost kind of fixed the problem for us, although we could grab an SDF smooth. And with one voxel, SDF smooths do seem to work quite well. We're working very thin at the bottom here, but it's okay because it's quite thin in real life. Slightly worried about that, but I'm hoping that doesn't break at some point. But we're getting our ring shape in play, right? So now we'll bake this one last time, and we will create a flat surface on the top. So we've already got a flat surface there, but we need it to be a little closer to the rim itself. So if we take a cylinder one more time, scale this down to something like this, and see what this looks like inside the volume builder. We can grab these two in, take our cylinder, I'll set that to subtract, voxel size 1, plug that into a mesher, and we're getting a pretty good circular look here. So there's not a lot that we want to shave off, we just want to make sure it's as flat as it possibly can be, which would probably be something along those lines. If we're taking a look, I'd say I'm pretty happy with that look. We can then bake that. And what we want to do is make a hole, right? So we're literally going to imagine the logo wasn't there, create a super slick hole. So we can grab a cylinder one more time, move that up, scale that to about here, I'd say. Something like that. Maybe a little thinner. Thereabouts. Oh, move that up. Thereabouts. Drag a volume builder. Plug this in. Just make sure you're subtracting the cylinder. Set this voxel distance to 1 here. It's a very trial and error way of doing things, but you'll realize that it kind of serves you. Up the rotation segments of the sphere here. It's almost like we're getting a weird shape there, so maybe we can scale this down a little bit. I think we might be working a little unsymmetrical compared to what we used to, but that's not an issue. We can drag actually, in fact, we'll leave the SDF smooth for now, because if we keep smoothing it out, we will just create issues for ourselves. And we've got our base mesh here without the logo. So now we need to think about getting the logo. So you need to source that. In my case, it's this -2 logo. So I think the brand doesn't actually exist anymore. But if I go -2 ring somewhere, it's this shop, I think. Not to give them credit, apparently they did some bad shit, but the logo looks cool. We can, there you got the logo there. Even we can just back off into -2 logo. If not, we might be able to source it from the site, but it's this that we want. So this is 720 by 720. Ideally, we want it maybe ever so slightly higher quality, potentially. Let's open that link in the new tab. We'll just save that. Unless the logo is somewhere on the website. About us. Maybe if we head to their Instagram, it'll be some. Oh, in fact, the logo is just there, but it seems a little jaded. Maybe if we head down to somewhere here. So you got the ring there again, which looks cool. I think that might be an earlier version because it looks nothing like that in real life. We're not getting a lot of clean sort of logos, so we may have to see even that. having problems with. So we may have to use what we have here, or wherever that was, this one here. Open image in new tab. What we can do is copy this image, or rather, we can copy this image, hop into Photoshop real quick, and I'll show you how you can take an image and create Illustrator paths from that, which you can then extrude in Cinema 4D. Right, so hopefully this should work quite well, and eventually you'll get the shape that you're after. This tutorial genuinely wasn't meant to be this long. There's a little bit of trial and error involved, but I hope you'll sort of like realize the process of creating something like this, and it should be pretty cool. And just to say, this shouldn't be your primary sort of modelling technique. It does really serve you to learn the original way as well. This just happens to work pretty well for me when I'm creating super intricate pieces, or I want to like play around with voxels and throw stuff around really quick, and that's why I use it. So we can do that. We can change the canvas size here from 225 to maybe something like 1,000 real quick. And in doing that, hopefully we should be able to scale this up, and I'm hoping to God that if we threshold this, we should just be able to get a pretty accurate result. So something maybe about this. Wish there was a smoothing thing in Photoshop, but unfortunately there is not. We can select the color range of white real quick, get that out of the picture, control click on this, head to paths and press this little circle thing here. It's going to create a work path from that. And we can how to export past Illustrator, click work path. We can set -2. Make sure you know where you're saving it. So I'll save it in the September folder. Hit save on that. Get back into C4D. I think it's file, import. There is no import. So next best thing, we'll just head to our, find our -2 logo, drag it in. Okay, it's going to open a new thing, but you can see our logo is inside C4D here. For some reason there's a dot. Oh, we'll find what path is that dot. Why is that dot there? I'm not sure. That dot there. Maybe it's the center of the thing. Never mind. I'm not going to overthink it. What we can do is, so take this. It's going to be a little etchy, but it will do the work. It will do the job. We can copy this into our ring here, scale this up a little bit because right now it's very small, so we can make this maybe 10, 10, 10. And what we want to do is extrude this, right? So grab yourself an extrude, drag this in, and make sure you're ticking hierarchical. Scale this down a little bit, and you see we've got our extruded logo. What we can do is make this a little easier to move about, so we can move the axis up to somewhere like here. Make sure we're unticking that. Hit coordinates again and rotate this about -90 degrees here. And now we can start tweaking this a little more. So the one thing you can see about voxels and volume building is that the geometry is so crazily dense because we've been working with one voxel, and that is how it actually works. So you want to reduce that. I've been working on a project recently for university where I made all my models and a lot of stuff in Volume Builder, and it really bit me in the arse because you had to remesh it all at the end. So bear that in mind, because it doesn't always go to plan, but it is a pretty useful tool. So we can scale this up to about 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, and then I'm hoping we can move this down a little bit. Now we're gonna need 0.7, 0.7, 0.7. So find something maybe like this. Let's take a quick look. If we move this in, what we're looking like, pretty damn good, I'd say. We're kind of getting what we want there. So I'd say we're getting a pretty close look here. So it wants to be ever so slightly more bigger. 0.75 maybe, something more like that, I'd say. Should look pretty good. I was worried that we'd have to indent it, but the only bits that seem to be indented anyway are the M and global bit into the side. and it does that anyway because of the way that ring's set out. So we may well be able to just chuck this all into a volume mesher, do some final, not volume mesher even, volume builder, do some final smoothing and call it a day there. So we can drag that into a volume builder, making sure we're having the voxels fairly low. I'll check that into a volume mesher super quick. So we can see our minus logo is intact. It's not a problem. Let's take a look at our options when it comes to smoothing. So that's not what we want. The more we smooth, the more our globe there starts to disintegrate a bit. So we may well have to leave it at about 5. If we were to increase these voxels, similar things would happen. So we can almost move the voxel size down to 0.5 in this case. And we want to move this to a point where it's not quite disintegrating, but looks a little smoother than what it was before. And at this point, you're getting a pretty good result. So it's a little obvious how he sort of like worked on this, and not to mention our M is sort of floating there. So we'd want to likely if we just take a second, what we could do is head to Photoshop, do a real quick technique to sort of like solve that issue. We could delete the work paths that are there currently. Take this, hit Control click, make a new layer, hit to select, modify, expand. We can go 10 pixels, that kind of does the job. Fill that with black, so fill black, okay. Or rather, we just want it on the M and the globe, right? So if we do that one more time, but just head to our original layer, then shift click on these 3 bits here, do the same thing again, select, making sure we're in a new layer, modify, meant to click, modify, expand, 10 pixels, right click, fill, so we're filling that with black, and we can just fix up these bits just here, super quick, making sure our brush is on black, just blacken those out a little bit so they're sharp, and these bits here too. We can untoggle this, and this is going to be our little backbone piece that we can export into here. So control click on that, pass, same thing as before, export your work path, head to file, export, pass to Illustrator, okay. -2 back, click OK, and pretty soon we should be able to get to the rendering part, so we can locate that super quick, drag the minus back in here, hit OK, grab that, paste that in real quick, control click the extrude, and just replace, I think this may have been scaled, so what we can do is keep the null there, drag this into that, that should therefore scale it up, maybe not. What we want to do is, if we just drag this out super quick, we do want this extruded, but we want this to be working the right way, so if we make this -180, we need to do a similar process to before, quickly grab the axis, move this up, take that, move this to the middle, and just make sure we're scaling this up the right way, right? So we can set this to, I think it was on about 10 before. 10 is way too big, and now it was about 7.5, wasn't it? 7.5, still not quite. So we may need to do a little bit of manual adjusting here, but we want this to really be ever so slightly bigger than what it was, maybe 666, a little bit of trial and error here. So something like that, but that's too big, 5.5. We need to find exactly what size we were working at here. Something like this almost doesn't look too bad, although it sort of gets off the edge of the globe there. So you want to keep tweaking this, 5.8, until you want to look here and think about our process. So if we move this down ever so slightly, we can look and see, actually, getting a pretty neat result there. Maybe ever so slightly down, 5.7, 5.7, 5.7, because I feel like that globe bit there is a bit thick. And we're getting a pretty nice look. So if you just take a look at our reference one last time, we can see that that's pretty thick. That sort of like substitutes all the way back. So we could just leave it at that, although I'm kind of worried about this bit. But if all goes to plan, we can wipe down the volume builder and it sort of gets smoothed out ever so slightly. Maybe if we were to head to the volume builder, make sure that it's SDF smooth is dragged on top. We could whack up the strength, but it's going to make our globe melt a bit. I think at that point you're getting a pretty accurate result. If we were to drag this side by side, you're looking pretty good. If I was to do this again, what I'd make sure is that I want the globe to be as accurate as possible, right? And that seems to be the issue stopping us from smoothing. So if you really wanted to fix that, you could head in here and sort of like separate it a little more. For example, if you were to drag these bits out, you could find the path of the globe and sort of separate it. So maybe we're able to do that. Maybe if we literally drag these cubes in back in the motor. So we see we don't have a globe as such there because we separated the path. If we make sure our SDF smooth is back on top, maybe we can smooth this out to create a little bit of a nicer result without having to worry about if we're affecting the globe there. So that's what it looks like at 100. And that seems to look a little better considering working with this metal. So we can bake something like that at this point, I'd say. I'd say we're pretty happy with that. We could hit C, grab our extrude, just to extrude that bit of the globe there. Whack this way down, because right now it's absolutely mahoosive. Maybe it's like 1 centimeter, 0.1 centimeter, and now it's disappeared, but it's alright, it's there. And we can make that super intricate, literally hover about there. Maybe move it up ever so slightly. And we can maybe, this looks pretty good, but we want this to be a little bit beveled. So what we can do is hit C on that real quick. See what a bevel does for us. It may well cause issues. Yeah, it always seems to cause issues. So if in doubt, we can just whack into another volume builder. Make it 0.5. Volume measure, unsmoothing it, but just leave it something like that. It's a little more rounded than it was before. And just like that, we can hit C. We can probably just combine these, connect objects and delete, and we have our volume built ring. So now, for the exciting bit, we've done the modeling for all intensive purposes. We can hop in Octane super quick, literally get ourselves a HDRI and a metallic material, and we can try our best to make this thing shine. We don't need to worry too much about materializing because it literally all is one coat. But we can hop back on here, literally hit render up in the corner, go to settings, make sure we're setting the width to about 1,500, 1,500. Let's make it look nice while we're at it. We could select this, make sure we're hopping in aces, path tracing, saving. We could get ourselves a camera even, just so we can hit here, and without zooming in, just set that to about 80. Getting a pretty nice show off render of our ring there. I believe this axis is centered, yep, so we can even just go about showing the ring off. Maybe something like this looks pretty cool. I like the way it kind of shows off that edge. We can go for something like this, maybe cone it in ever so slightly. Oh, I'm hitting W on the keyboard to sort of change the rotation. And we can structure it maybe a little something like, I like the way it looked before, something like that. So we can take that and we can run with it. We can center up a little more. And we can grab ourselves a HDRI environment. So I'm sort of thinking the HDRI doesn't matter too much because it's going to be the environment that you're looking at, right? So for this, like the sort of like style of this brand and stuff, I feel like almost like a graffiti type HDRI sort of environment would be quite cool. I believe I have access to that. Grayscale Gorilla might be able to pull through. So we just wait for our Octane Sky to load. We can head to Grayscale Gorilla up here, plus library. And once this loads down here, always takes a minute to load for the first time, we can start picking through what we have. So super useful if we head to HDRI and literally search graffiti. We have a graffiti one, so we can drag that into our file name here. It's a daytime one too, so that should work quite well. We can set this to aces. Doesn't matter about the rotation as such for now. We can head to this, clear it, so we've got a black background that we like. It's invisible. And literally head to materials here, create metallic material, see what this looks like. And our ring is pretty brought to life there. So the edges and stuff all look quite good. Looks like a pretty interesting result. We can rotate this round a little bit to sort of like show off more the top there. We've got a nice focus. And if we wanted to, we could play with a few like imperfection maps if we wanted to. We could up the roughness, but this ring is not rough at all. So maybe purely for the sake of catching some nice little bits, we wanted a little bit of imperfection. I believe somewhere I've got some sort of like fingerprint or grunge maps that I could use. Let's actually take a look, because I think if I search grunge here, I've got these folders which are from Megascans, I think. But this is how I source my textures. So we can head to view large icons real quick so I can see what we're working with. Pick a few of these random ones, see which ones sort of like work. This one looks a little bit more like concrete for some reason. But I will show you how you can whack these on and maybe get a little more of like sort of imperfections and stuff. You got these fingerprints, but these fingerprints are way too much like, God, ever so slightly. So do those ones, to be fair. Subtle fingerprints, potentially. Those ones are very messy fingerprints. Maybe we can just find ourselves some grunge. Let's have a look. So we got something like this. Maybe we'll just import this for now. We've got a gloss layer, a mask layer, and a roughness layer. So maybe if we just drag these two in and sort of see what works. Hopefully this doesn't take away from the detail, but maybe adds a little something. So we got a gloss layer here, which we could drag into, or let's just see what it looks like in the roughness. I know we've got another roughness channel, but you can see even that is sort of added a little bit of sort of like rise here. If we set this to cubic and seamless, because bear in mind this isn't UV'd at the moment, that should give us a bit more of a shot of getting some of those scratches there, you see. We can also just tweak the UVs here. So if we want to make this a little bigger, we can set this to 200, you'll see. If you increase that like that, you can see we're getting a pretty good reflection here of what we want. We're getting some speckles on it as well, which looks quite cool. So that's just our mask layer. So we wanted to replace that with our roughness, we could. Although I think it looks better with a mask layer because it sort of it leaves a little more for the metal to be shown. And we can see there's a little bit on the surface there too. But in general, as usual, a lot of it's going to be tweaking your lighting, right? Because you want your bits to look the best. So you can even do something like this. Tweak over, you can get some of the green highlights if you wanted to. Rotate this round. If you weren't happy with the sort of like natural look of this, there are metal HDRIs which look quite cool too. So you can head into grayscale. Drag down to make sure we're not searching anything. I think here it's not Ultimate Skies, but Pro Studios Metal Volume 2. You've got some really cool looks here. So if you were to make something a little more abstract almost, you could drag some of these in, and these will really show off the details in your piece. So just like that, we're starting to get some much sort of like darker looks, which really show off the edges and whatnot. And we can once again sort of like drag that round, show off particular parts, color correct this later on. I always like having a little bit of light shining on the top. And just like that, we've essentially recreated our ring using Volume Builder and marketed it a little bit for something that you could send off in 3D. So having said that, I hope that gave you a super quick breeze through course of using the Volume Builder and its potential. And I hope you guys enjoyed. So this is more of a stable technique that you can sort of employ in your repertoire, as all my tutorials really are. They shouldn't just exist on their own. They're all stuff that you can like sort of take on board and apply together to sort of fix problems where you might need them. And I hope you appreciate and enjoying the content at the moment. So thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you very soon in the next video.